Hello. Today we're going to discuss Dr. Chuck Hodell's book, Introduction to Instructional Systems Design, Theory, and Practice. And we're going to be talking about Chapter 1, which is the journey to instructional systems development. Chuck, it's going to be great talking about some of these concepts in this book. Let's talk about this first chapter and some of the key concepts that you bring about. The first one being sharing skills and knowledge as an inherent part of life. Can you talk a little bit about that?
And I think this is an important place for people that are learning instructional design to start thinking about what they're actually doing. So, as an instructional designer, you got a very complex set of things that you do. You write objectives, you do populations, you do evaluation tasks, you work with subject matter experts. It's a very complicated, professional, sophisticated system. And to get beyond that, I think sometimes you have to go back to the basics. So, especially when people are first looking at instructional design, either as someone who's interested in the field or someone who's taking a course in this, I think you need to go back to the basics. And the basics are really what's learning transfer. And this is an inherent part of what we do as human beings. We are exchanging information this second. You go back to when you were 3 minutes old or you're 100 years old, you're still exchanging information. And there's no instructional designer there to tell you how to do that except in very isolated situations. So, go back to the first campfire, the first hunting experience, all the things and the generations of learning transfer that are in this first chapter. And look at how this has evolved. And I think once you get a sense for the foundational issues of how learning transfers, then you can make this something more complicated and sophisticated and incredibly great. But let's start with the basics, and that's just exchanging learning.
Now, learning is a process. Can you talk a little bit about how this learning is a process, in fact?
Yeah, learning, it's like anything else. There are things that are involved in this. So you go back to the old communications model where you have a sender and a receiver and all the noise in the middle. And, anybody's taken a communications class has seen this so many times that you just sip coffee during it. But the notion is it is a process, and that's what gets us to instructional design. Okay, there's a way that people transfer information and there's a better way to do it. So there is a process. And instructional designers started learning pretty much after World War II. It started during World War II, but after that, they started to look at the science of this. So, how do people actually learn? What's this learning transfer thing all about? And Gagne came up with 9 events. You have to do these things in this order to be able to transfer learning in a more productive and efficient way. So, that's the notion of that concept.
Now, there is learning that is done in informal and also formal settings. Can you go a little bit into both of those settings?
Yeah, I think 99% of learning is informal. These are things that you learn outside of a classroom or an organized learning experience. And you have to take all this in account as you design more formal training. You have to think about what do people bring to this learning experience? What do they have as prerequisites? What do they have as advanced knowledge? And all of this stuff is part of this. So you go from the informal to the formal, and it may go back to the informal afterwards. But there is a variation, and the variation is the fact that instructional designers generally design formal learning experiences, but they're based on informal learning that everyone brings with them to a classroom or a computer screen.
Now, there are, from what I understand, 8 generations of learning transfer. Can you talk a little bit about each one of those generations?
Well, I think I'll amalgamate the concept of learning transfer in these generations. As I started to look at this when I was writing this book, I wanted to try to differentiate the ways that people learn based on a number of different factors. First, it was language, a very basic concept, but can you imagine trying to transfer learning without language? And then you move up to writing, uh, cuneiform or whatever type of language you might have been trying to write in very simple words. And we moved from that to more sophistication. So we got into printing and we got into more formal things. And now in the eighth generation, we're looking at very sophisticated ways to transfer learning experiences electronically and digitally. So I think it's important as you look through this section of the text to think about how this evolution has taken place and what this means in terms of what we do now as instructional designers. And it also sets the framework for what's going to happen next in the ninth generation, which who knows at this point what that's going to be. A little scary if you look at some of the stuff that's out there, but there will be a ninth generation, and instructional designers need to be ready for that.
Instructional design is a system. Can you talk about the system's approach to instructional design in the concept of curriculum development?
Systems, that's the whole thing. Your entire world is a system. Watching this video is a system. Putting it together is a system. Your family is a system. You eating. Anything you do is a system because one part relates to another. And sometimes in ways that aren't obvious or not even aware of these things going on, but systems are systems. And a learning system and a system for designing curriculum is a really great way to do something efficiently and effectively because you take into account all of the different elements that impact this particular experience. So you look at populations, you look at content, you look at where you're going to deliver it, you look at how you're going to deliver it. So every instructional designer is a systems thinker, a systems analyst, and it's your job as an instructional designer to put these things together and come out with a product on the other end.
Hmm. Now, instructional design can really be viewed as both an art and a science. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think, and especially for World War II and Gagne and Briggs and Megger and all these other folks kicked into the science of instructional design and learning. I think people looked at teachers as artists. They stood in front of the classroom, they presented material. It was a social thing. They were there after school. You brought them an apple. Whatever concept of teacher relationship you had with learners, that's what it was, and that evolved. And it went from this art of being a great person and a great presenter and personable and all these other things to the science of, okay, let's take the best of what we do as instructors and trainers and teachers, and let's now meld that in with the science of instructional design. So it's evolved. It's been a migration from the art to the science. It's definitely both. But now I think you can make a pretty strong argument that the science of learning is about the science of instructional design.
What is the impact of programmed learning and the advent of scaling of teaching?
Yeah, program learning essentially is the very basis of what Gagne did in looking at learning moments and learning elements. So program learning is you do things in a certain sequence. Do you start out with very simple information and you build on that platform or scaffold it up? Do you get to more complex content? And it's this whole notion that you don't start with the hardest material and go to the, the least demanding. If you do that, you're going to have a disaster in a learning sense. So what you want to do is start with the basic information and build on that platform. And if you think about it, that's what we do as learners outside of a classroom or anywhere else. You always start as a novice. When we started as novice as kids, right? We couldn't eat, we couldn't talk. Go back to all these things that Piaget talked about and all his generations of children's learning. And you look at it and it's all about building on something else. It's all about scaffolding learning. So program learning takes this and makes it more of a science and more of an approach.
Hmm. It's like the building blocks.
Exactly.
I can see that visual, which is really strong. Now, let's talk about criterion testing in terms of the standards for evaluation of mastery.
Testing, wow, you get all over the board on this, and it's a great part of this chapter, I think, when you look through all this. Testing or evaluation of mastery in any sense can be based on a lot of things, right? You can say, well, people participated or they had a good attitude or whatever. But as you start to evolve that, you now need to think about, okay, we need people to be able to demonstrate something. We need to be able to see it and measure it. And criterion testing and all these other different aspects of how we look at evaluation were part of this evolution of what we have today with instructional design. So the very sophisticated parts of instructional design like gaming and other things that are taking place are based on these very basic concepts like criterion testing.
What are some interlocking knowledge and skill areas that are required as an ISD practitioner?
Well, I think some of the things you need to look at are the very basic building blocks of what learning is. So we talk about a lot of things with generations of learning and how we transfer learning informally, et cetera. Then you need to look at it from the science aspects of this. Okay, what are systems? You have to be a good systems analyst. We talked about that. You have to be able to differentiate what's important and what's not important. You have to make some pretty important decisions about what's important, if that's not redundant. And you have to look at all this in the sense that, okay, most structural designers are just very detail oriented. They like to dig into stuff. They like to find out what the answers are to things. So as a professional structural designer, you're going to spend a lot of time asking questions and trying to gather data and looking at information and benchmarking things and all the stuff that I enjoy, which may make me a little bit different, but I think you'll find most instructional designers the same way. They really like to get in and find out what's going on, because when you do that, you can build an incredible course or project for people to learn and amazing things.
Yeah, it's like putting that Sherlock Holmes hat on and being the
Oh, you got
investigator.
to. Yep, Baker Street.
Absolutely. One of the last concepts I'd like to talk with you about is the infinite landscape of ISD careers. Can you talk about that?
Well, there are only about 300,000 of them. The interesting thing about our field as it evolved was nobody knew they were instructional designers. They were teachers, trainers, they were, whatever you want to think about. The term instructional design really didn't start to mature until the late 60s, early 70s. Um, Dr. Marvin Cook, who started the first instructional design master's program in the country at UMBC, probably wouldn't have envisioned the same thing that we see today. Same with Robert Gagne at Florida State in 73, 74, when they started to put the finishing touches on what we know today as the 9 events and many other things. So, it's very interesting that we now have many titles for instructional designers. And if you look at job postings, you start to get a sense of what people are looking for in terms of employment, what employers want. And sometimes they're instructional designers, sometimes they're something else. But essentially, most of these folks do the same work. And I think the one point of putting all of those titles in the first chapter of different careers is there are so many different things related to this field. It is so sophisticated and so wide open that many of the things that nobody 10 years ago would have thought of as instructional design are, in fact, the very basic entities of instructional design and the people in instructional design. So I'm an instructional designer, but I could call myself 150 other things and be in the same place.
I think you putting that in that first chapter was really pivotal because, I'm new in the ISD journey, and knowing that there is a reason to be in this field, the fact that it is so wide open and there's so many opportunities and it continues to just grow is really exciting for somebody who is embarking on a career in ISD, and especially for students watching this, learning, being in the classroom as well. It's really it's a wonderful thing to be able to look at a career and say, wow, there are definitely opportunities. There's not going to be any kind of a loss for jobs out there.
No, I can't imagine. I think this is one of the most not only important, but I think challenging, interesting, whatever wording you want to put on this. This field is going to explode. And I think the more people realize this work has been done for so long and called something else, the more it's start going to come together. And you're going to start to see real professional growth in fields that we now call instructional design. So that was kind of the point of this first chapter, is to get people to have a sense of where this all came from, how it evolved, the different generations of learning transfer, criterion testing, this notion of it moving from an art to a science and containing elements of both. I think if anybody walks out of chapter one with anything, it's just the notion that this has been around a long time and it's really something to be involved in.
Well, thank you for bringing us through this chapter, this first chapter. I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation with you in continuing chapters as we move forward. And I hope that our listeners will also really enjoy this and get a lot out of these insights that you're sharing with us as we make our way through this new book and also through our ISD journeys in education. Thank you very much for that.